Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Midwestern Marks Institute live broadcast. I'm here joined by an extra special guest from Taiwan today, Comrade Xiangyu. We're going to be talking about Taiwan-China relations for dummies, for beginners, for those who don't know that much about it, like myself. We'll also be talking about the position that American communists should be taking on Taiwan-China relations and how we can expect the U.S. empire or the capitalist empire, I should say, to try and use Taiwan as a way to attack China in the future. So it should be a really informative stream. I'm looking forward to it. We'll get right into it after the intro. All right, so I'm going to start this stream just by giving my basic understanding of Taiwan, which is extremely minimal, because we think that'll be sort of where everyone else is at in terms of their understanding of Taiwan. It'll be similar to mine, which is very rudimentary. So I'll give my understanding, and then we'll let Xiangyu jump in and correct anything I said or explain anything I said. So my understanding is that basically after the Civil War in China and the Chinese War of Independence, the KMT fled to Taiwan after the communist victory in 1949. The Kuomintang nationalist government that was in power over all of China prior to the communist government saw China as being part of Taiwan, and Taiwan as being part of China would be the more correct way to say it. It's one country. So basically, the Communist Party inherited this claim to Taiwan from the Kuomintang nationalists. It's not something that they invented themselves. And my understanding is that most people in Taiwan see themselves as being part of China. I know that the U.S. government supported the KMT, the Kuomintang, in the Civil War. I'm not sure how long that support went on, if the U.S. continued to fund the KMT after they left or lost the war and went to Taiwan. But after that, my knowledge of Taiwan is very little. I don't know if the KMT is still relevant or if there's still the U.S.-backed party in Taiwan, the preferred political group that the U.S. is backing in Taiwan. I would imagine that the U.S. Is backing Taiwanese separatism, those political elements in Taiwan that want to completely separate from China and create their own republic. But I don't know who those separatists would be or how prominent they are. That's my very rudimentary understanding of Taiwan. Go ahead and tell me how right or wrong it is.
I think that's a very typical understanding of Taiwan by both pro and anti-China crowds in the West, which is somewhat true but not entirely accurate. Like even when the U.S. supported the KMT, it did so to keep Taiwan from, I guess in the U.S. you falling to the communists, and I guess it's as much as it supports separatists, it's really limited to just ensuring that there's a force over here that can be used as a wedge against the communists. Now, I think what a lot of people don't know is back when the U.S. was overtly supporting the KMT, it covertly supported the separatists as controlled opposition to the KMT because, believe it or not, the U.S. didn't really like Chiang Kai-shek because he had too many ideas of his own, and so did his son Jiang Jingguo, who was actually educated in the Soviet Union for 12 years, who for some, it's isn't it kind of kind of coincidental how the guy who was educated in the Soviet Union was the one who really like developed the economy here like successfully. Anyways, as a side thought, but yeah, he kind of didn't really listen too much to the U.S. as well. I mean, he was developing nukes behind the U.S.'s back and everything. So yeah, the U.S. relied on strongmen like Chiang Kai-shek or Park Chung-hee in South Korea, or I guess they tried to prop up Syngman Rhee in South Korea, but he was so unpopular that he got overthrown. But as soon as the so-called communist threat started receding a bit, the U.S. kind of had a different plan and started favoring like liberal democracies over these strongmen for PR reasons and also because of malleability. I think another fact that I need to correct is it depends on the generation, but most youth today do not see themselves as politically part of China because ever since 2000, the education system here has been revised in a top-down manner. Like the people didn't vote for it. But 2000 was the year when the first DPP candidate became leader of the Taiwan area, and his administration started just revising history textbooks and stuff so that kids would not, because you know how like in America when you start going to school like in first grade you start learning things like, oh, this was who Benjamin Franklin was, these were who the founding fathers were, so it's to kind of get the kids to identify with this history. Well, back when my parents were growing up in Taiwan, it was just like thousands of years of Chinese history, and to really get the kids to identify with Chinese history and all. But after the revisions, it was kind of more focused on just Taiwan, and the rest of Chinese history started being relegated to almost foreign history. And but I think to really understand Taiwan, we need to go a bit further back and understand that Taiwan was ceded to Japan in 1895 in as a war concession following China's defeat in the first Sino-Japanese War, and it was returned to China in 1945 following Japan's defeat in World War II. And 1945, you know, during World War II, the communists and the KMT were allied, but then the Civil War resumed, and as the KMT's retreat continued, pretty soon Taiwan was all it had left. So I want people to get out of this mentality that like Taiwan was a barren island, and then Chiang Kai-shek just came here and then established a new country. No, no, that wasn't his perspective. The perspective was he Taiwan was the last remaining territory of the country that he still held, and both the communists and the KMT saw Taiwan as a part of China. So it's not entirely accurate to say that the KMT saw Taiwan as the real China or that China is a part of Taiwan, because it's more like mainland China and Taiwan are both parts of China, and that the KMT saw the so-called Republic of China as a legitimate Chinese government. And this kind of stuff happens in Chinese history all the time. For example, between the Han and Sui dynasties, there were many different warring kingdoms that controlled different parts of China, but each and every one of them saw itself as the legitimate government of China and had the goal of reunifying China under its respective rule. Or I guess for a pretty good analogy, we can look at the case of the Qing dynasty succeeding the Ming, because after when the Ming dynasty fell, remnants of the Ming dynasty held onto Taiwan and had the goal of retaking the mainland back from the Qing. So you know, it's really funny because I see a lot of pro-China Westerners post the memes like of the constitutional map of the so-called Republic of China, saying, "Oh, see, like look at how unrealistic it is. Like there's still like these people in Taiwan want independence, but they still think that they're the real China." And it's like the map of all of China with it's the constitutional map. But here's the thing: separatists do not like that map. They don't even, and hardline separatists don't like the so-called Republic of China. Um, it's what they don't understand is this is the one point of unity Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong had. Yeah, they had different understandings of what China was, but at least they agreed that China was a single country. And the other thing is, if the Taipei administration today were to remove the mainland from the map, it would send a signal to Beijing that Taipei is attempting to move forward towards either formal independence or the formalization of two Chinas. Because right now we don't have two Chinas. Right now you have one China with two administrations, one based in Taipei, one based in Beijing, that officially um, considers itself to be the sole legitimate government of China. However, in the case of Taiwan, that claim has not been actively pursued since the 1980s. The KMT has kind of shifted from being a part of reunification to the party of a status quo, while the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, the party that's incumbent now, um, it's kind of weird because they in their party program it talks about abolishing the so-called Republic of China and establishing a new Republic of Taiwan, but they operate within the framework of the Republic of China, but they don't want to touch the claim that mainland China is also a part of the so-called Republic of China, and they actually separatists angered the CPC when they tried to say oh, the relations between Taiwan and the mainland. Well, they don't say Taiwan and the mainland, they say Taiwan and China to kind of imply two countries are special state-to-state relations, not relations between two regions. And the fact that you're saying, or not just you, but most Westerners in general say Taiwan and China is very indicative of how much Western media's impacted the framing of this, because Chinese people don't say China and Taiwan or Taiwan and China when speaking of the two sides of the strait. We'll say Taiwan in the mainland or Taiwan in the Chinese mainland, because if we don't have the mainland, then we say it's kind of like yes, I know there's contentions in the issue of Hawaii, whether Hawaii should be independent or not. I'm not going to get into that for the sake of this argument, but let's just say there was no issue, no controversy whatsoever. It would be like if you said Hawaii and the United States instead of like Hawaii and the contiguous 48 states, for example. So, anyways, the U.S. did support the KMT. I mean, let's put it this way: all of the parties, the major parties in Taiwan, are firmly under U.S. control. But as of now, the U.S. I believe the Democratic Progressive Party is the more favored party by the U.S. simply because, one, it has slightly more popular support among the people in Taiwan than the KMT nowadays, and two, it doesn't have that historical baggage of being a Bonapartist party that it once was. But at the end of the day, it's really just to make sure that Taiwan, regardless of its legal status internationally, is still a stronghold for U.S. empire. I mean, the U.S. was reluctant to support the KMT following Chiang Kai-shek's defeat because they saw him as corrupt and just incapable. So even before the KMT fully retreated to Taiwan, in the beginning of 1949, the U.S. sent a diplomat to meet with the Taiwan provincial governor Chen Cheng to discuss the establishment of a Taiwanese republic. But luckily, that governor was loyal to Chiang Kai-shek and he refused. The U.S. wanted the establishment of a separate republic, so if Chiang Kai-shek came here, he would have to do so as a political refugee and would be stripped of all his power. But this was a complicated time. I mean, the U.S. had all these designs for the Asia Pacific, and the role that Japan eventually played as the U.S.'s main ruling junior partner in the region was supposed to be given to Chiang Kai-shek. The U.S. kind of wanted China to be the way India is today, large but weak. And yeah, so during this time, the U.S. was brainstorming all these different options to make sure that Taiwan would not fall to the communists. And one of the options was even just straight up giving Taiwan back to Japan, even though Japan had surrendered Taiwan. So yeah, but Chiang Kai-shek, you'll find that there's one thing he's very good at, and that is ousting his opponents and outmaneuvering people trying to like mess with him, so that even though people don't like him, he's the only option that they get to pick. So yeah, he did that with the US. The US tried to replace him with someone more cooperative, like Sun Liren, for example. So since he did that, the U.S. kind of settled on the strategy of overtly supporting the KMT to keep pressure on the Communist Party of China, while covertly supporting Taiwan separatism as internal controlled opposition against the KMT. Because keep in mind, Taiwan separatism was illegal in Taiwan until the 1980s. You wouldn't get you wouldn't get shot for supporting Taiwan separatism. That was for communists and suspected communists, but you would get thrown in jail. So yeah, that's a long-winded intro of the issue.
No, that was good. That gave me a lot to think about too. Yeah, it's interesting, and it's so interesting how distorted our perception is in the United States. I thought that analogy about Hawaii was perfect because even though Hawaiians probably do have a very legitimate claim to independence from the United States, that you'd never
Yeah.
describe Hawaii as being separate from the United States. It's
Yeah.
considered part of the mainland, and Taiwan is much closer to the mainland in China than Hawaii is to the continental United States. So yeah, I think we already covered some of the first question, but you can add anything you want to add. But the first question I had was, in the US, obviously we hear that Taiwan and China are completely separate countries, and China is always on the verge of invading. China is the aggressor. However, as you explained, Taiwan has been considered part of mainland China for years, and or not part of mainland China, but part of China for years. And in the past, the U.S. has agreed to that, the one country, two systems policy. So can you talk about the existing relationship between China and Taiwan versus the sort of comical made-up relationship between China and Taiwan as it's portrayed in the Western media?
Well, want to correct you real quick. One China, two systems is the system that Hong Kong and Macau operate under. It was the system was designed for Taiwan, but I mean objectively it is one country, two systems on two sides of the strait. But yeah, I mean the U.S. never recognized Taiwan as an independent country. I mean, even before it switched recognition to the PRC in 1979, when it recognized the government on Taiwan, it recognized it as the Chinese government. It didn't recognize any Republic of Taiwan. It recognized the so-called Republic of China. And Taiwan hasn't been considered part of China for years, but it's been a part of China for centuries. So yeah, I mean, if you look at anthropological evidence, like Han people from the Chinese mainland have been in contact with and traded with the inhabitants of Taiwan for well over 1,000 years. And the earliest written record of Chinese contact with Taiwan was from the Three Kingdoms period in the 3rd century. I believe it started in the Three Kingdoms period was 220 AD to I think like 280 or something like that. I'm not too good with my ancient history. But from the Song Dynasty onwards, the Penghu Islands. So the Penghu Islands are a group of islands like right in the middle of the Taiwan Strait, a little bit closer to the Taiwan side. Today they they're administered as Taiwan province, but from the Song Dynasty onwards, the Penghu Islands were already incorporated into China. And migration from southern Fujian. So Fujian province is the province of China that's right across from Taiwan. And most of the people in Taiwan have ancestors who came from there, including myself on my mother's side. My mother is 6th generation in Taiwan with her ancestors on her paternal side from Zhangzhou, which is in southern Fujian. Anyways, migration from that part of Fujian started increasing when the Dutch established a colony on Taiwan. It was actually based in today's what's it called Tainan, which is in southern Taiwan, my mom's hometown. And they had a fort. Right now it's called Anping, but back then it was called Zealandia. And they needed cheap laborers. So yeah, migration kept on continuing from the mainland following the defeat of the Dutch by Chinese forces. And the final significant wave of migration from the mainland occurred in 1949 when 2 million defeated soldiers and I guess some elites from the mainland, like who were allied with the KMT or some who were caught in between, arrived to the island. So I think before this conversation, like, did you have this idea that most of the inhabitants are on Taiwan are descendants of those who retreated in 1949?
Did I have that conception?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I've heard that you and Carl Zah talk about it a little bit and about the population that was there for years prior. So,
Yeah.
but other than that, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people had this understanding of Taiwan that begins and ends in 1949, but
Right.
that wouldn't make sense because only 2 million soldiers came here, and the population today is 23 to 24 million. So they would have had to been very productive for that claim to be true. Anyways, I mentioned that because the KMT did a lot of bad things, but committing genocide against indigenous Taiwanese was not one of them. Anyways, let's go back to the early 17th century. This was when the Dutch and the Spanish established bases on Taiwan. The Dutch were in southern Taiwan, the Spanish were in the north. And the Dutch later defeated the Spanish. And it was around this time that there was a pirate by the name of Zheng Zhilong. He set up his base on Taiwan with a bunch of his men from southern Fujian. And Taiwan was an ideal trading post and base because it is located between the Chinese mainland and Japan. And at that time, the Chinese imperial court banned trade with Japan. So merchants needed a trading post outside of the jurisdiction of both governments. And basically from that point on, Taiwan was a place where southeastern Chinese pirates and western colonizers would keep on fighting each other. And Zheng Zhilong, this pirate guy, he was a Ming loyalist, but he capitulated to the Qing dynasty in 1646. And when he did that, the Dutch became the sole rulers of Taiwan until Zheng Zhilong's son, Zheng Chenggong, more commonly known as Goxingya or Koxinga in the West, defeated the Dutch and set up a Ming rump state that ruled Taiwan from 1661 until 1683. And the rump state was defeated by the Qing, and the Qing Empire set up the Taiwan prefectural government as a part of Fujian province until 1885 when Taiwan became its own province. So I want people to like really let this sink in. Let's not talk about the Ming rump state. Let's just talk about the Qing dynasty. Taiwan was incorporated into the Qing dynasty in 1683. So Taiwan has been like undoubtedly and arguably a part of China since way before the US was established. I mean yeah, so as you know, the 19th century, let's jump a little bit forward, was the century of humiliation for China. And you had like a lot of foreign powers coming in and carving up China, and China couldn't keep up because China's military might was just nowhere near as good. I mean, they didn't basically the British could just come sail by our coast and do I guess not a drive by, a sail by, and just basically make China sign a bunch of unequal treaties. So among one of these treaties was the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which was signed in 1895, which ceded Taiwan to Japan as a form of war reparations. So this began 50 years of colonization until 1945. And 1945 was when Taiwan was returned to China. But unfortunately, you have historical revisionists telling, like, brainwashing people in Taiwan into saying, "Oh, the Qing government did not want you. Those Chinese don't want you." He gladly handed over Taiwan to the Japanese. But actually, no. He the Qing emperor was very reluctant to give Taiwan over to the Japanese and tried to negotiate and give other parts of China to the Japanese instead. But Taiwan is just that geopolitically important that Japan would not settle for anything less. So I think I guess this goes into the next question is, why do so many people care that much about Taiwan? It's a tiny island. Why does China care so much? It could just give it up, right? But I mean, okay, why did the Dutch want it? The Dutch wanted Taiwan because of its proximity to the Chinese mainland and to the Dutch East Indies. The Spanish wanted it because of its proximity again to the Chinese mainland and then to the Philippines. And the Japanese wanted it because it's close to the Chinese mainland, and also they saw it as a gateway to the Austronesian islands, and Japan wanted to invade both. So and today the US is interested in Taiwan because it's dead center of the first island chain, which is like a chain of islands that stretches from the Kuril Islands through Japan, I guess Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, and basically a chain of islands and places with either U.S. military bases or U.S. friendly governments. And a reunified China means a break in that island chain, and it also means China has unfettered access to the Pacific. So one thing I want to ask is, if Taiwan is formally an independent country, then it should have a declaration of independence and a date of establishment. But can you tell me when the Republic of Taiwan was established? And okay, I know in 1895 there was briefly the establishment of a Formosan Republic, and people like to use that as, see, they did declare independence once, but yeah, let's look at the context. It was established by Chinese patriots who did not want Taiwan to fall to the Japanese. So they established this government that was quickly quashed by the Japanese invaders. And if we look at in Chinese history, we have something called the era name. So I guess in the West, AD, the year 80 is in the year of our Lord. So it's supposedly I guess year 0 is supposed to be the year Jesus Christ was born, though although it's debated whether or not he was born that year specifically. Traditionally in Chinese history, you have like the year is named after the emperor. I guess what they did when they established the Formosan Republic was they named the era name Yongqing, which means forever Qing. So you can see how you can see that establishment of a short-lived Taiwanese republic is not the same as Taiwan separatism today. So you can't compare apples and oranges. So but back to the whole thing, the Republic of China was established on January 1st, 1912. And the People's Republic of China was established on October 1st, 1949. And the UN and the PRC recognized the PRC as the successor state of the ROC, which means that areas held by the government that continues to use the ROC label, meaning the administration of the Taiwan area, it's really just a militarized rump state within the People's Republic of China. So this is why I guess from the Taipei perspective, officially that a lot of people don't like, but it's still, I mean, you still got to play by the rules. That's governments, civil societies. They operate under laws. I guess the one country would be the Republic of China, and the mainland is under communist occupation. But this is why in Taiwan, affairs regarding the mainland are handled by the Mainland Affairs Council and not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So yeah, that's basically the relationship. There's a lot more complications, and I think we'll get into this later, but Taiwan separatism actually began as a liberal opposition movement against the KMT and not the CPC.
Huh. That's so interesting because it's so not what you would expect, without a deep knowledge of the situation. But yeah. Our next question has to do with the recent elections in Taiwan with the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, that we've mentioned a few times, coming out on top. It was a somewhat close election. There were a couple other parties that did well. I'm drawing a blank on the third party that did well. But either way,
Taiwan People's Party.
Yes, and
it's a newcomer party.
Right, they were. It was the first time a third party had done that well since like 2000, I guess. So
yeah, the 2000 was actually it was really interesting. That party was the Taiwan People's. What is it called? I know it's called Qinmingdang. Anyways, that was formed as a splinter from the KMT because the 1990s was a point in history when the liberal faction of the KMT dominated, whereas before there were always different factions of the KMT, and the Zhang family kind of kept them all in check. But after the younger Zhang Jingguo died, yeah, everything just went out of control. And the guy Song Cui, he actually the candidate who almost won, he actually lives like on the road next to mine. Like,
oh really?
One of his apartments is there. I think he has other properties, but he it was funny because when people tried to smear him, they were like, he comes from Mao Zedong's hometown.
That's funny.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, you're good. That was an interesting side note there, because I was wondering what happened in 2000, but
we can get into that.
We could. The first, I want to get your analysis of the recent election, though, with the DPP coming out on top. Because some people in the West have suggested, I think hyperbolically, that this means war between China and Taiwan is right on the horizon. a war between the mainland and Taiwan. So can you give your analysis of the election in general and what it means for Taiwan and China going forward, and maybe dispel some of the myths that you've heard from either Western media or even Western communists?
I think it's very alarmist because let's put it this way. From 1988 until 2000, the KMT was led by Li Denghui, and Li Denghui was later expelled from the KMT and came out as a separatist. And then Tsai Ing-wen, the current leader, was actually his political protege. And from 2000 to 2008, Taiwan was led by Chen Shui-bian, who was also from the DPP. And then Tsai Ing-wen led Taiwan from 2016 to now. So I mean, if you were born like in the year 2000, like you've been under nominally separatist rule longer than you have been under KMT rule. But one thing I want to say is the DPP did not come out on top. The DPP candidate won leadership or so-called presidency, but they lost parliament. They lost their majority in parliament. It was very close. It was 52 seats to the KMT, 51 seats to the DPP, and 8 seats to the new party, the Taiwan People's Party, and 2% to independents. And no one got the majority, like the 50% majority. So they recently had to break the tie, and it was the KMT. The KMT's Han Kuo-yu became speaker of the parliament. So now the parliament is it's under KMT control, but it's almost 50-50 split between the two major parties. So the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, will play an important role in breaking stalemates, you know. But basically the DPP lost parliament, and Lai Ching-te, he was elected. If you count even abstentions, then Lai Ching-te, the DPP candidate who won, was elected with only 29% of the vote. So I mean, most people today in Taiwan detest the DPP. The only problem is the opposition is split. So the CPC is not like anxious to come and like attack tomorrow. It's like always. I mean, the P in CPC stands for patience. So it's maintaining this wait and see attitude. And war will only break out if Taipei crosses Beijing's red line, which is declaring independence or making moves that signal independence. I mean, Pelosi's visit was kind of a challenge to the status quo, but what the CPC did was not outright do an invasion, but it just used it as justification for increasing military operations around the island, and which I think was the smart idea. And the thing is, Lai Ching-te cannot declare separatists, like declare independence, because he does not have enough support in the parliament, and so his only option would be a coup. But he doesn't have the balls for that, and you need sufficient support from the military to in order to do that. And the soldiers who join the military, they swear allegiance not to Taiwan, but to the so-called Republic of China. If he does a coup, that means he overthrows that government, and the soldiers are no longer legally obligated to serve him, are they? Now, I think people are alarmed because Lai Ching-te, before his candidacy, for a long time during his career, he's always positioned himself as a hardcore separatist, and he's called himself 务实的台独工作者, which is like a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence. He's always made himself a fighter for independence. But notice how since he announced his candidacy, his rhetoric has changed to, oh, we don't need to declare independence because Taiwan's already an independent country whose name is the Republic of China. And this is oxymoronic because first of all, the DPP's party program has as one of its stated goals to abolish the so-called Republic of China and establish a Republic of Taiwan. The so-called Republic of China constitution states that Taiwan is but a province of China. So, I mean, what he's saying is basically this. He's saying the first part, Taiwan's already an independent country, to make the separatists happy, except for the extreme hardliners. And the second part is to just promise both the U.S. and promise the U.S. that he's not going to change the status quo and create unnecessary volatilities. And it's also telling Beijing he's not moving towards separatism. I don't think people realize this, but the U.S. supports independence, separatism, kind of like, but not really. It uses separatists as attack dogs on a leash. And what it likes to do with these separatists is, depending on its needs, it can either tighten the leash or it can kind of loosen it up. So it does not want the Taiwan administration to unilaterally declare independence, because then like it's like a dog breaking off of the leash. A dog owner doesn't. Michael Vick wouldn't want his dogs to break off of a leash, and so yeah, I mean, I want to point out that when a nominal separatist changes his views to maintaining the status quo, he's objectively moving towards reunification, even if he doesn't want to admit it. Just like how the KMT moved from the party of wanting reunification to maintaining the status quo, it's objectively moving towards separatism, or at least it's conceding to them. So yeah, but you look at the elections, notice how the hardcore separatist parties are no longer in parliament at all, namely the Taiwan State Building Party, which is a little bit more like fascistic, like blood and soil type Taiwan separatists, and the New Power Party, which is a little bit more like leftoid, like Baizuo, like which emerged from the Sunflower Movement, which was like basically a color revolution in 2014. Neither of these two parties won parliament. Actually, the New Power Party, the Baizuo Party I talked about, it's kind of like if the Fraud Squad, like AOC and them, nominally had a separate party, but then like in all important matters, the New Power Party still voted along like with the DPP. So I think one takeaway I want to give about the election is, hold your horses. Don't need to be alarmist. In fact, this could be a good thing. Why? Whenever we have a KMT leader like Ma Ying-jeou, what ends up happening is he tries to make everyone happy to the point that no one's happy. He tries to appease to the mainland, but then like the separatists are unhappy, so he has to like kind of pay lip service to them. And then the US is concerned, so he has to buy more weapons from the US. But then it's because the CPC and the KMT have this long history of, it's kind of like, you guys are bastards, but you're our bastards. So we'll kind of you're that asshole in the family, So it's kind of hard to sanction. But Lai Ching-te does not have this problem. So I mean, if the CPC wanted to go the route of canceling favorable terms of trade with Taiwan, it could much easier do so with Lai Ching-te as leader over like having a KMT leader. And also, as the economy deteriorates more, people in Taiwan know that our economy depends on the mainland, and they're going to want negotiations to start happening, because I mean, look at the election results this time. People are sick of being held hostage by the issue of separatism or reunification. They're sick of political ideology taking precedence over the people's livelihood. And the advantage that Lai Ching-te has is, since for the longest time he's stylized himself as a separatist, he has the political capital of going over to the mainland and not getting labeled a communist shill. Whereas it's kind of like how Nixon could shake Mao Zedong's hands and not get called a communist shill or get called a pinko commie, because he's always been so just ardently anti-communist. But objectively, I mean, the thaw in Sino-US relations was a good thing. So I think Lai Ching-te, I mean, wait and see, because he's the people in Taiwan and the CPC and Parliament basically have him by the balls, and he's always been the US's, for lack of a better term, the US's bitch. So yeah, I mean, he can eventually maybe even go like. But the thing is, if the DPP wants to talk with the CPC, it has to meet one condition. And this is the only reason why the CPC refuses to talk to the DPP today. It's because the DPP refuses to accept the 1992 consensus. The 1992 consensus basically was an agreement that the KMT and the CPC came to in Hong Kong back in 1992, saying that both sides agree that Taiwan and the mainland belong to a single country, that there is only one China, and that they will work towards reunification. Now, it's left open-ended enough so that the KMT could come back to Taiwan and say, "Oh yeah, we say one China, but what we mean is a Republic of China." It's just to like give them some face, you know. So anyway, should Lai Ching enter talks, that means accepting the consensus, which means the DPP is no longer a nominally separatist party. So what I think the biggest takeaway is, Taiwan separatism, maybe perhaps as an ideal, is still alive, but as a movement on the ground, it's basically dead.
Interesting. I have a whole bunch of questions spawning up that I'll save them to keep it short. But I do want to ask if you. I have two questions, I guess, that I want to ask. Did you have a party that you were sort of rooting for in the election, or that you voted for, or was it kind of just like whatever? It's a bourgeois election, not worry about it.
Kind of like okay. Here's the thing: I hate the DPP, but what the results I wanted was basically what happened: a split between the leadership, the so-called presidency, and the parliament. So Lai Ching the leadership and a KMT dominated parliament, and like I said, since it's 52-51 in parliament between KMT and DPP, with the remaining 10 and third party or independent, that gives a lot of leverage to the new party and also to independents. So I'm actually pretty happy with the results, because I mean, the KMT candidate, I mean, he's not nothing's gonna change under him. Like he'll say, yeah, I want better relations with the mainland, and we're gonna rely on America for defense and rely on the mainland for the economy. We're going to staunchly oppose Taiwan separatism, and he's gonna do the same thing that Ma Ying-jeou did, which is try to make both the U.S. and the CPC happy, while at the same time just like pissing off separatists. And like the separatists become like louder and stronger whenever there is a KMT leader in power trying to move things closer. Like you know how conscription in Taiwan was for a while reduced from 1 year to 4 years. Well, before 1 year it was like 2 years or 3 years depending on your type. It was reduced to 4 years under Ma Ying-jeou as like a goodwill signal to the mainland, saying, okay, yeah, we still have our laws, we still have to have conscription, but we're going to reduce it to the bare minimum because we don't see a war happening between the two sides. He allowed direct flights from the mainland to Taiwan. You know, the first time I went to the mainland, we had to stop in Hong Kong. We couldn't just fly directly from like Taipei to Beijing. So it's a huge deal, because now I can right now I can't because I'm a conscript, but my service ends in March. So come March or April, when I want to go to the mainland, I can just get a direct flight, 3 hours, boom, I'm in Shanghai. But nice. He tried to move the two sides closer, but it was done in such a top-down fashion, and the people in Taiwan felt that they were being left behind, and they were kind of wary because you have decades of anti-communist propaganda, plus like at that time like 8 years of separatist propaganda, and he was getting ready to sign this trade deal, which would have like basically unified the service economies of Taiwan and the mainland, and that's what gave rise to the 2014 Sunflower Movement, the Color Revolution, you know. And it was that color revolution that basically woke washed the DPP. I mean, the DPP was always kind of like a liberal party, but believe it or not, until the 2010s, it was kind of like somewhat of a populist redneck party, and like not exactly a cosmopolitan party. But then 2014, like the DPP kind of just repackaged itself as like the woke party, and like it put LGBT issues on the forefront and all that. And so basically, like what we're seeing with the squad, like people we here in Taiwan saw early on in 2014. So it's like, if you're familiar with both like Taiwan and I guess not just Taiwan, but like even like places like Ukraine, I mean, you saw the Maidan color revolution. What we're seeing now in America with the Democrats is essentially the reimportation of color revolution tactics onto U.S. soil. So, anyways.
That's interesting. My last question, and then we'll get back on track. But I was reading some reports from military industrial complex think tanks and U.S. think tanks about Taiwan, and they said that about 10 countries recently have decreased or cut trade with Taiwan and moved towards trade with the mainland instead. And they said that that is an effort by China to poach Taiwan's trade partners and take them away from Taiwan. Is there any truth to that? Is that a strategy China's doing, um, or is that just imperialist bluster?
There's some truth to that because I think right now doing that is basically a demonstration to Taiwan saying, "Hey, we let you thrive and we let you have all these trading partners and stuff out of our goodwill because we see you as our Chinese compatriots. We see you as a part of our country, but we can take that away easily if we wanted to." That's kind of the mentality. I mean, it's not like forcing these countries to do so. It's just offering
Right.
them a better deal. I mean, what's
Right.
wrong with that?
Right, which is why more countries are trading with China anyways. I mean, that's that's the direction the whole world's moving.
Yeah. And more and more countries are cutting diplomatic ties with Taipei. And I want to just clarify. A lot of people say, well, what is it, like 12 or 11? 11 countries still recognize Taiwan as an independent country. No, they don't. They recognize the so-called Republic of China as the Chinese government. So they still recognize one China, even though the people in charge of the so-called Republic of China today want to sweep that part of the constitution under the rug. It's an alt one China constitution. If you look at the additional amendments to the constitution, the preamble to them starts with in order to address the needs of our country prior to reunification. What does that mean? What's the country in question? And then it further says like, oh yeah, elections were resumed in Taiwan after martial law because during martial law it was like, yeah, we can't have elections until the country is reunified. So then the additional amendments basically said, okay, Republic of China is one country, but it's going to have two administrative regions, the free area, or what the mainland calls the Taiwan area, and the mainland area, and the two areas can have separate laws. So that's how elections were resumed on the higher levels. So yeah, anyway, sorry for digressing a bit.
No, no worries. I appreciate it. So the imminent China-Taiwan war that we're constantly hearing about in the Western media might not be on the horizon, but China does want reunification eventually. So do you think that's something that could possibly happen in the near future, or is it just like a real long-term goal? And do you see a path to achieving that either in the near future or far in the future?
Here's the thing. I think my parents may see reunification. It's a maybe for them, but I think in our lifetimes we'll see it. Here's the thing. Time is on China's side. So a lot of people like to draw comparisons with the SMO in Ukraine, but it's very different because Putin launched the SMO after like waiting for 8 years because the walls of NATO and the US were like closing in on Russia. And whereas in the case of China, as every year passes, it's in a better position before, whether militarily or economically. I mean, people will say, yeah, well, China's not like up to par with the U.S. military. Well, it doesn't need to be because it's fighting a defensive war in its own region, whereas like the U.S. is going across the Pacific. I mean, let's look at it this way: the Chinese People's Volunteers pushed the U.S. back to the 38th parallel during the Korean War. What Chinese people call the war to resist U.S. imperialism in Korea. I mean, it did so with like barely any air cover. I mean, it paid a very dear price, but it gained in return basically like respect on the international stage that it's serious. It basically got street cred. Anyways, China is about to complete its third aircraft carrier, the first stealth bomber, and develop hypersonic missiles. And even before the development of this stuff, I mean, you look at like U.S. military experts, top brass from like in policy papers from the Rand Corporation. They basically say that like if war breaks out, Taiwan would fall within a week. But the thing is, reunification by force, the act of reclaiming Taiwan's easy. It's dealing with the people after such a war that would be a pain in the ass. And I mean, Chinese people don't want to kill Chinese people. And the other thing is the one advantage that Taiwan has over the mainland was TSMC. But with the U.S. sanctioning mainland China and banning TSMC from selling chips to the mainland. So I guess people don't know this, but back when Huawei designed their own Kirin chips, yeah, it was designed by Huawei, but it was fabricated by TSMC. Because designing and fabrication are two different processes. Fabrication is a very delicate process, and not everyone do it. But basically, mainland China is pouring in billions to fund its chip industry and to catch up to world leaders. And I mean, it's catching up. I mean, it's still it's still a few years behind. But here's the other thing: TSMC cannot stay on top forever. I mean, basically, every generation of chips, there's like different processes, and you don't know which one will work until you actually try it. And you can only basically invest in one process. So with every new generation of chips, all these different companies like Intel, TSMC, Samsung, they're rolling dice with God. And you know, as the next right now TSMC is on top, but how long will that last? Not to mention the US passed the CHIPS Act, and which basically says that companies that receive subsidies from the US, like chip companies that receive subsidies from the US, must pass their research results to the US, which it's probably going to give to Intel, so it's forced tech transfer. And I mean, you have people like what is it, Vivek Ramaswamy, saying, "Oh yeah, we need to defend Taiwan until we get the chips," and like even Donald Trump's just kind of being transparent about it, say, "Oh, we need the chips," you know. So I mean, Taiwan's losing its bargaining chips. It's I mean, Taiwan did get rich in the last century as it found its spot in the global value chain led by the U.S. But as U.S. imperialism wears itself thin and there are no longer any incentives for Taiwan to be friendly with the U.S., we're going to see attitudes change pretty soon. I mean, because look at the degrowth agenda. What happened is the economy grew really complicated. So like the value chain became global. Different countries specialized in different things, but this global value chain was led by the U.S., which you know, play, like regions like Taiwan and South Korea did really well under because they got in where they fit in, and they also had like semi-planned economies that weren't like full that could be rationally planned. But the problem is the same global value chain system was the one that mainland China joined, and then it kind of used it to get tech transfers and build itself up, and now it's creating an alternative value chain. So the U.S. is like, either we stay on top or nobody gets to do nobody gets to benefit from this value chain. So think of the value chain as like a party. Basically the party's over, the party's winding down, all of the Patron and the Patron and all of the nice booze is gone, and all there's left is Bud Light. And yes, I'm saying Bud Light because it's cheap, and because it's also like kind of like it reflects the woke washing of U.S. empire. And all there is left is that. And now the U.S. to send a message to tell people, hey, get out. It's basically just like throwing the furniture, like dragging people out, throwing them out, taking the furniture in the house out, throwing it out, and setting it all on fire. So I mean, that's like basically the degrowth agenda. And so I mean, perceptions take a while to catch up to reality. I mean, we have people in Taiwan, especially like the boomer generation, with fond memories of Taiwan becoming rich, really rich in their lifetimes. And they know that part of it was because of friendly relations with the US. But once this process continues for a while, and like I mean, Taiwan's economy is very lopsided. It's basically TSMC and service industry. It needs an out, and it'll become increasingly undeniable that reunification is our only out. It's in our best interests. And when that happens, we'll probably Taiwanese people we're Chinese. Chinese people are very pragmatic, right? We'll see Taiwanese people cry out for reunification even more louder than our mainland compatriots once the conditions are met. And I think the CPC knows that, which is why it's pursuing its wait and see attitude. It'll like say what it needs to say on the international stage, saying we will not rule out the use of force to reunify our country. But I mean, that doesn't mean that this is the number one option. I mean, when Abraham Lincoln reunified the Union, what was it? He basically did not rule out the use of force to reunify the Union. Right?
China is so good at playing the long game. The CPC is, anyways. It's It seems like, anyways. And I don't know, when you were talking about the importance of TSMC, I couldn't help but think about the U.S. Representative Seth Moulton like a year ago or two, saying that if China moves towards reunification, we should tell them we're going to bomb TSMC and just blow the whole thing up. And then
See,
Michelle Flournoy, this like arch neocon of the U.S. State Department, was like, no, you're gonna cause a breakdown in global manufacturing if you do that. But it shows the depravity of the U.S. empire and the kind of psychopaths who are at the helm of it right now.
see, I like these people more than I like strict like liberals because they're honest about
Right.
about what they want. And it's like some people in Taiwan here, when I tell them these things, they say like I'm conspiracy minded, and I'm just like, no, this is stuff that's straight out of the horse's mouth. But what I have found, I wanted to give it like an aside, is like for the last year, so my service last year began in March 14th. It ends this year March 13th. And after basic training on like I was sent to the National Fire Agency's training center, which is where all of the firefighters in Taiwan have to train for 1 year. It's very rigorous. They all like by like the third or fourth month of their training, they all have six packs. Anyways, yeah. But it's located in central Taiwan, and like I'm like on the administrative side of things. So I work with like a bunch of civil servants who live in like rural Taiwan. And they kind of intuitively know all of this stuff. So it's like they're kind of not as affected by like cosmopolitan, like the Western elite, the global elite, like propaganda and indoctrination. And if you're in rural Taiwan and you look at like young people, what they're watching, a lot of them are more likely to watch like TV series from the Chinese mainland than like Netflix, because like Netflix is more foreign, you know. But if you go to places like Taipei, it's gonna be a little bit the opposite way around. So and so then I want to say on YouTube, I mean, okay, yeah, I mean, not on YouTube, on Twitter, yeah, you have like these English language voices in Taiwan that like claim to represent Taiwan, but like they're like basically their job is to let Westerners know what the administration here wants the West to think. I'm kind of an anomaly. I mean, clearly by the way I talk, you know that like I had some sort of upbringing in the West, right? But I have a reunification standpoint, and my political development kind of steered me towards the other way. And well, I'm not going to pretend that most people in Taiwan right now want immediate reunification. I think what I like to do is explain how separatism got to where it is today, why it's there, why do people think the way they do, because we have to in the words of Mao, we have to cast aside illusions so to really get to the crux of the issue. And I am pretty optimistic about the future of China and reunification. So yeah.
Huh. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Yeah, it's so interesting to talk to someone who understands the kind of propaganda that we're dealing with in the West and understands concretely the situation in Taiwan. But I wanted you also to maybe clear up some myths about the 228 incident, 228 incident, which has its 77th anniversary coming up. Can you talk about what this event was and how it's been misinterpreted or misconstrued in the West?
I think most Westerners simply don't know about this incident, but
I
then
didn't know
like
about it at all, to
yeah,
be honest.
they'll look on Wikipedia and say, "Oh, there was this massacre by the KMT in February 28th, 1947," and then like because they're operating under the assumption that Taiwan was a barren island inhabited only by indigenous until the KMT came, and because the death toll has been like greatly inflated by the DPP to like impossibly high numbers, they'll use that as like proof that the KMT um carried out genocide against Taiwan's indigenous people, when in fact indigenous people just weren't really involved in the event at all. Oh, I want to give a suggestion since we're on this, since people are visual learners. There's a film called City of Sadness. It's about the event, and it's actually a pretty balanced account of the February 28th incident. So I guess you can also look up the City of Sadness. Anyways, this was the event that led to decades of martial law and white terror in Taiwan. Well, one of them, anyways. The other was the communists on the mainland, like beating the KMT. But the problem is, like I said, this event was reduced by separatists into a simple matter of mainlanders massacre Taiwanese people. KMT stands for killed many Taiwanese. But the reality was like a lot more complicated than that, because basically Taiwan was returned to China in 1945, and back then it was a war-torn society. And the KMT was too busy fighting the civil war on the mainland to take care of the Taiwanese people. So there was heavy inflation. People were taxed heavily. You know, so there was gross negligence and just mishandling of everything. And my grandma told me, like, she was in Taiwan when we were returned to China. The people here welcomed um the return of Taiwan to China. They welcomed the KMTs like as the liberators, but the following years of just negligence and all sorts of other issues just made people start thinking, wow, like life under the KMT isn't really much better than the Japanese. And honestly, for the first 2 years of KMT rule, because of the negligence and mishandling of everything, as much as I hate to admit it, it's probably true, because before the war, I mean, at least there was a level of stability. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was still colonial subjugation, and like basically like when you're occupied by a foreign power, it's basically like excuse the crassness, but it's like the whole collective is getting cucked. But anyways, Taiwan was already a majority Han society, like I said, at this point in history. But the Han in Taiwan were mostly from southern Fujian, and there was a minority of them being the Hakka people from Guangdong. Guangdong being the province where Cantonese is from. And 1945 was the first time you had mainlanders from other parts of China coming to Taiwan in considerable numbers. And these new arrivals were seen as outsiders, because keep in mind, this was back when most people could speak standard Mandarin as a common language. So you literally had people from other parts of the country where they couldn't speak a language you understand. And I guess if you didn't understand them, you had to write. But then a lot of people back then were illiterate. Actually, no, illiteracy wasn't that big of an issue in Taiwan, because as much as I hate to admit it, Japan did take educating the people here seriously, because they wanted an educated workforce. Anyways, there was, so as you can see, those mainlanders were seen as like outsiders, but at the same time, the mainlanders in the KMT like saw local Taiwanese like they treated them with suspicion, because they were like, okay, well, you guys grew up under Japanese education, you guys were colonized by the Japanese, so their loyalty to China was also questioned. So during this time, a lot of civil servants, they were just straight up replaced by mainlanders who were oftentimes underqualified. And just a fun fact, my grandma kind of got screwed in this process, because the first time she took her middle school entry exam, it was under the Japanese system, and it was before she entered middle school that like that retrocession happened. Taiwan was returned to China, so she had to take her middle school entrance exam again, like under the new system. So she had to do her examination twice. So she was also a victim of World War II in a sense. So, anyways, on top of all of this, on February 27th, 1947, a tobacco monopoly bureau enforcement team in Taipei confiscated illegal cigarettes being sold by a woman named Lingas Advantage. So basically, she was selling untaxed cigarettes, kind of like some Chinese dudes in Flushing, New York do. Yeah, if you want to get like a carton of cigarettes for like $50 in New York, just go to Flushing. And yeah, I don't know anything though, NYPD. Things escalated, and one of the people on the enforcement team, I guess hit her with his rifle, and the people who were around like intervened, and they surrounded the officials, and those officials ran away. But then that same crowd later went and protested the police and the government about this incident, and like they began to like air out all sorts of frustrations, like inflation, unemployment, government corruption, and all sorts of other reasonable grievances. And during that protest, soldiers shot into the crowd to disperse them, and this created a chain reaction that led to a rebellion breaking out on February 28th. And protesters took over government buildings and military bases by March 4th, and they announced what had happened like in the days prior, like over the radio, and then the uprisings ended up spreading throughout the island. Now, I want to mention, yeah, there were some communists involved in the uprisings, but it was a riot. So there was like people from all sorts of with all sorts of convictions joining in because they were all like pissed off. And unfortunately, part of those riots were like lumpen elements who basically had just finished serving in the military during World War II. Like they were conscripted into the Japanese military, and a lot of them were like unemployed and frustrated with everything, and they were just looking for any convenient scapegoat. And it was during this time the KMT started enacting martial law. It started enforcing curfews, and yeah, those hooligans started associating, if you're from the mainland, then you're bad because the KMT is also from the mainland, and all of our problems are because of the KMT. So so then like these like thugs basically started going around like randomly just beating people if they're mainlanders, or even killing them, or even raping them, like sadly. And some people from the mainland also speak the dialect that's spoken in Taiwan, from southern Fujian, the Minanhua or Hokkien. So then to test to see to like ensure that those people aren't like mainlanders, they would start asking them questions in Japanese, because if you were in Taiwan at that point, you would have been educated under the Japanese, so you would at least speak at least some Japanese depending on your level of education. Yeah. So of course, this part of the incident is downplayed today by the DPP to promote the 228 incident as simply a matter of mainlanders killing Taiwanese people. But if you look at it, it basically began as a bunch of local Taiwanese thugs randomly killing mainlanders while a riot was going on. So in any country, if this sort of stuff happens, there's gonna need to be some sort of intervention to like calm things down. So anyways, protests continued, and they kept on demanding things like democracy, the right to strike, greater autonomy. And another thing they wanted was they wanted 2/3 of commissioners to be people who've been in Taiwan for at least 10 years. So what does this tell you? It's saying that like the new KMT government officials were like outsiders. They weren't in touch with the people here in Taiwan. And yeah, so anyways, March 8th, reinforcement arrived from the mainland. They docked in the northern city of Keelung, and yeah, it was pretty bad. A lot of people were killed, and it was also during this time that some local Taiwanese started using the military to settle like personal scores. Like, let's say I have a beef with you, and like a military guy was like trying to find out who were instigators of like some of these crimes. I was like, hey, Eddie? Yeah, he's like this communist who got these people to go and beat up that person because he's a bad person, and the soldier wouldn't know. Hey, he's not familiar with Taiwan, so he just believed me and go and arrest you or kill you. And from this incident, I think we can see that there was a division in Taiwan society along provincial lines. And now I'm going to introduce two Chinese words, 本省人 and 外省人. 本省人 means people of this province, which refers to people whose families were already in Taiwan prior to 1945, while 外省人 means extra provincial people, which refers to those whose families arrived from the mainland between 1945 and the mid 1950s. So Chiang Kai-shek and those people would be 外省人. Guo Taiming, like Terry Goh, the Foxconn guy, would be 外省人, for example. And the numbers of this incident keep on getting inflated for political reasons. And because these two terms, 本省人 and 外省人, are not easily translated into English, some have just taken to translating 本省人 to native Taiwanese. So with these inflated numbers and the twisting of events where it's just a simple matter of mainlanders aimlessly killing Taiwanese people, we have people who read about this incident on Wikipedia and just start assuming that this was some sort of genocide against the indigenous people, which, like I said before, like the indigenous were hardly involved in this event, if at all. So I think, but I think the significance of this event is that it shows us the extent of how the KMT mishandled things and let things blow out of proportion. And the fact that this discussion of this event was banned in Taiwan until the 1980s gave separatists a bunch of ammo to rewrite history. And I think we're gonna find a common theme is that the KMT, like during its martial law era, its like one party dictatorship, was against separatism, but it did a lot of stuff that made it easy for separatists to take advantage of. Like, let's face it, Taiwan is rife with many layers of contradictions, as you can see now. And this is just surface level stuff. And you have just bad actors willing to take advantage of these contradictions to forward their aims, including the U.S. ruling class using this stuff to, maintain their geopolitical interests. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the first event that it reminds me of is the Holodomor, where you have an event that goes down, that happens because of weather conditions or the kulaks hoarding grain. It just gets manipulated by every political group to try and push their own agenda, to the point today where, if you read the Wikipedia page on the Holodomor, it's going to be so far off from what actually happened that it's almost comical. So, yeah, it's interesting because if you like, I just read the Wikipedia page to prepare for that question, and like you said, that's how it's portrayed, as just a genocide of indigenous by the KMT. So it's so interesting to hear that that's not what happened. But
speaking of indigenous, I want to suggest this book to your audience. It is Statecraft and Political Economy on the Taiwan Frontier, because this book basically illustrates how there's this sort of idea that Taiwan became majority Han because like Han settlers just came and killed everyone or whatever. But actually, a lot of people in Taiwan who are classified as Han were like had indigenous ancestors who were assimilated, because like the two groups like had a very symbiotic relationship. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, there were incidents of like Han people screwing over indigenous people and taking land, but there were also like many instances of Han having to rely on indigenous for protection and renting land from indigenous landlords. In fact, if you look at people's family Bibles, so if their ancestral province says Taiwan, it means that they were indigenous, but that they've been assimilated into Han culture. It's very interesting because in Chinese history, you have all these different nomadic groups like invading and taking over China, but then they adopt like Chinese culture and Han culture. So it's a lot of this cultural assimilation is basically one of centuries of cultural contact and dependence on one another. So I want to just get that out of the way. But of course, I mean, there are inequalities and there are issues that need to be faced, but it's not just a simple matter of Han settlers in Taiwan bad, need to go back to the mainland and whatever. So it's like, okay, if that's the case, though, I guess let's go back in the order that we came. Because a lot of like nativist Taiwanese will start saying things like, "Oh yeah, you mainlanders came in Taiwan and took over us," and like now you think you like, and like they act like they're the victims and how like and whatever. But then it's like, okay, if you want to go that route, then we can go even further back. And at some point, somebody in your bloodline was probably did some bad things too. So
right.
And like you should go back to the mainland first, because a lot of the people who call themselves like native Taiwanese, like they came to Taiwan like around like between like 400 to like a century ago.
Yeah, I've seen that theme in a lot of the woke imperialist propaganda about China and Taiwan. This idea that there's Han supremacy, and that's the biggest issue in the mainland or in Taiwan is
the DPP. If you want to argue that, like the DPP is Han supremacist too, because the Taiwan separatist movement is predominantly Han, and indigenous people in Taiwan overwhelmingly vote for the KMT because their idea is, the KMT at least has the decency to buy our votes. Yeah, for the longest time that did happen. Basically, they feel that like the DPP, like and like Taiwan separatism is just like they correctly think that it's just a an ideology for well-to-do local Taiwan, like well-to-do local elites who use the identity politics, taking advantage of the fact that the majority of the population on Taiwan are not only Han but are Bensenren, like those like local Taiwanese whose families have been here for a long time, to further their aims, and that it doesn't really benefit indigenous people. That's how they see it. They correctly see it. I mean, the people aren't stupid.
Right. Huh. Well, I know we've talked about Taiwanese separatism already, but in I would say from the propaganda in the West, they portray it as like probably 90 to 95% of people in Taiwan actively want to separate from the mainland and become independent. So how popular actually is separatism? Obviously, as you said, the DPP is nominally a separatist party, but it's not like they're calling for that right now. Is there a popular sentiment in Taiwan towards separatism, or not really at all?
It depends on our definition of it, because if you consider separatism to be moving towards the formal establishment of a Republic of Taiwan, not popular at all. But if you define separatism as people just believing that Taiwan's already an independent country, it's popular among the youth. Taiwan separatism as a movement, though, it's not unpopular. It's certainly more popular than it was back when my parents were growing up, but it's not as popular as it was in the 2000s to 2010s. Because at the end of the day, like I said, people are sick of being held hostage by this issue. They care about their own livelihoods and all of that. And to understand Taiwan separatism, though, we have to understand the various classes of Taiwan and the transition from Japanese rule to KMT rule. So basically, the landed aristocracy was very pro-Japan because the Japanese gave them considerable power during colonial rule. And you'll find that a lot of the DPP elites, like, they basically came from these families and they felt screwed over by the KMT because the KMT learned hard lessons on the mainland. So one of the first things they did after the retreat was carry out land reform. And whereas the KMT was beholden to the landed aristocracy on the mainland, that wasn't the case in Taiwan. It got its power from US backing and its own military. So it could do whatever it wanted with the landed aristocracy here. And it was like, yeah, we don't want a bunch of peasants revolting, so we're gonna take land from landed aristocracy, give them some shares of state-owned companies, and give land to peasants. So yeah, that kind of pissed off a lot of the pro-Japanese landed aristocracy. And I'm going to get into this later, but basically local Taiwanese people were not at the high levels of government up until like the 80s. So like those landed aristocracy, like they felt screwed over, but they couldn't get into high levels of government. They couldn't move beyond the local levels. And this was not an active policy to keep like Taiwanese people out of politics. It was a result of martial law and the suspension of democracy. And I'll get into that later. So basically, the landed aristocracy, even before, they didn't want Taiwan to be returned to China. And after the return, they were kind of pissed off. They felt screwed over. And Japan still wanted influence in post-war Taiwan. So, I mean, as you can see, Taiwan separatism did not begin as a grassroots movement. And you'll find that when the movement first began, like in its very early nascency, like in the 1950s, it was like exiled intellectuals. First in Japan, later in the US. It's kind of like the World Uyghur Congress. Like how many of them were actually in Xinjiang? And like I don't know about the makeup of those groups, but I feel like a lot of those groups, like the World Uyghur Congress, like I feel like a lot of the members are probably not even Uyghur or like Chinese from any other parts of China. So there was a so-called provisional government of the Republic of Taiwan that operated out of Japan from the 1950s until its dissolution in 1977. And what's really interesting is half of the members of this so-called government were Taiwanese. So like most of the members were Japanese. And this organization would spread propaganda all over Japan. They would write magazines and all that stuff, including to Taiwanese students studying in Japan, to spread the idea that Taiwanese people are not Chinese and not even culturally, which is very funny because when Japan occupied Taiwan, it classified Taiwanese people as Chinese. So you can tell that there was a lot of opportunism going on here. And later, the U.S. became the center of separatist activities. And we have organizations like FAPA, like what is it, Formosan Association for Public Affairs, or something like that. It's the membership is mostly like diasporoids who have lost touch with Taiwan. And like in 2000, like in the early 2000s, they even they even lobbied for the government here to send troops to Afghanistan and Iraq. So yeah, they're kind of a joke. um the Taiwan, the so-called Taiwan lobby is also kind of split. You have like before you had like the pro KMT forces, and you also have like the separatists. Anyways, yeah, the US is very good at diversifying. So if you want to learn how to do investments and diversify risks and stuff, just look at what the US does with the various forces. I mean, like I said before, the US supported, like covertly supported separatist activities both in the US and Taiwan. So because while the KMT was anti-communist, it was not on board with creating a de jure independent Taiwan or to formalize a two China situation. And the U.S. wanted assurance that especially at that time, that Taiwan would not fall to the communists. I think today it kind of realizes that it's not a matter of if but when. So now it's damage control. So the U.S. switched recognition from Taipei to Beijing, and Taiwan became diplomatically isolated. So a lot of separatists thought we're diplomatically isolated because of the one China policy, and the one China policy would not apply if we simply just abolished the Republic of China and established a Republic of Taiwan. And if you look at their liberal, like the early separatists, their documents, they're saying the KMT does not have the right to govern Taiwan. We need a Taiwan for Taiwan, like with redrawn borders that reflect our administrative regions, and we need to create a new government by the people for the people and not just a bunch of like old farts from the mainland. But I mean, most of their demands have been met while keeping the so-called Republic of China there. So I think it's important to talk about how when separatism is to talk about how when Taiwan was under martial law, democracy was suspended, and the so-called president was elected by the so-called National Assembly, which was in theory supposed to be elected by the people. But during martial law, the so-called National Assembly was never reelected. So like the one that was elected on the mainland in 1948 was the same National Assembly that kept on governing Taiwan up until the 80s. So, and since the elections took place on the mainland, it goes without saying that it was made entirely of elites from the mainland. So and Chiang Kai-shek's ruling elite were all white Shengren, or like those mainlanders. So you had like Ben Shengren, like the local Taiwanese, hating white Shengren in general for being like the elites. But most white Shengren were not part of the elite. They were in fact working class members of society who ended up in Taiwan during the retreat and couldn't go home. I mean, the KMT promised them that they would be back home pretty soon, but that, yeah, 1 year turned into two turned into five. And you know why it wasn't until like I think 1987 that those people could go back to the mainland and visit their families. And do you know why?
No.
There was a retired YouTube pilot. He's from the mainland, and he came to Taiwan during the retreat, and he really missed his family. And by then he was a cargo plane pilot. So he decided to hijack his own plane and fly back home. And he was greeted by the CPC as a hero. I think he became an honorary member of the Communist Party. Yeah, he couldn't come back to Taiwan because he was a traitor. But anyways, that happened, and there were a bunch of protests in Taiwan by those like old soldiers. A lot of the soldiers who came to Taiwan like were impressed into the army. Like they were just basically kidnapped by the army. I've heard so many stories from like old people like about how they went out to go buy groceries, and they were just kind of taken by the army, and they just ended up here, and they were separated from family. So I have great respect for. I mean, I'm not like, I don't side with the KMT during the Civil War, but I mean those soldiers. I mean, I feel for a lot of them because they were just caught up in a very complicated situation, and they're actually the loudest voices for reunification in Taiwan, though they're kind of dwindling in numbers. But anyways, Taiwan separatism was born from aristocratic Benshengren, like the locals, and the middle class liberal Benshengren. Like with the rising middle class, you had like a rising class of liberals and like intellectuals who later spread their ideas to like the working class Benshengren by playing up provincial animosities. And but even then, like people in Taiwan hated Taiwan separatism until the turn of the century. They saw it as like just, they see it the way the average Joe working class hates like some of the rioting Antifa types, you know.
Mhm.
So you talk about, so like the DPP rose during the liberal opposition movement against the KMT. It like really started in the 80s, and they worked with a lot of the separatist activists who were working abroad. They basically like, so they created a party. It was illegal at first. So there was oh, okay, sorry. I'm going to go back a little bit. Opposition parties in Taiwan were banned, but people could join as independents. And eventually these people create a coalition called the Dangwai movement. Dangwai means outside of the party. So there wasn't a party, but there was. Like if you're outside of the party, you're the opposition. And there was this liberal, with the rising middle class, there was this liberal opposition movement that grew, and pretty soon the DPP was formed, and I mean there were crackdowns on these people, on these separatists, and like the lawyer teams who were hired to defend these people later all ended up in the DPP basically. And the reason why there is Taiwan separatism in the DPP party program is because it's one thing to be in power, it's another to not be in power and to just be guided by pure idealism. So I mean, like the DPP became incumbent in 2000, but when it became incumbent, it had to deal with political realities, and it can't just do whatever it says. It has to operate within a certain framework. In the 1980s was also a time when color revolutions were happening in socialist countries, and I think liberal opposition movements in places like Taiwan and South Korea were part of a two-pronged operation by the US, because it was ousting socialist countries, but it was also ousting the Bonapartist strongmen that are propped up in places like Taiwan and South Korea, because they were no longer needed since the communist threat was waning. So also during this time, the US supported the liberal faction of the KMT while also supporting the liberal opposition movement. Because before then, the KMT under Chiang Kai-shek and Jiang Jingguo was not very cooperative. So the US, it prefers a more malleable puppet, is what I'm saying, and that's what they have today. And as far as the US and the one China policy, and also like egging on separatists, it's basically a case of wanting to have its cake and eat it too. It recognizes the PRC as the sole legitimate government of China, and it acknowledges PRC's claims over Taiwan, but it pursues a policy that it calls strategic ambiguity, which is basically like saying Taiwan is a part of China in words while enabling and encouraging separatist activity to continue, so that the administration can continue being used as attack dogs. But there is a precedence for this. It's because I mean there was already trade and like other like non-governmental ties between Taiwan and the US that, like, I guess following the switching of recognition of the PRC and like before reunification, these things needed to take place in some form, but it's also kind of just become a cover for US intervention in local politics over here. So I think from this conversation so far, I'm almost done by the way. It's very apparent that Taiwan is plagued by many layers of contradictions resulting from 50 years of Japanese colonization, the mishandling of contradictions among the people by the Kuomintang dictatorship, mutual misunderstandings between the local Taiwanese and like the mainlanders who arrived later. And on top of all of this, there is a global elite and a U.S. ruling class willing to take advantage of all of these contradictions for its own gain at the expense of the Chinese people on both sides of the strait, but especially to the detriment of the people on Taiwan. And most people on Taiwan, I think this is what you really wanted to know, really just want to maintain the status quo and live a life, and they want their kids to have better lives than they did. Nobody wants to die from a war that'll happen if independence were declared. And I mean, after what happened in Ukraine, most people know deep down that if a war breaks out, the US would hang the people here out to dry and use us as cannon fodder. I mean, we do have a generation of youth who were educated to believe that Taiwan's already independent and that they're not Chinese. But I mean, social engineering is a thing, and like just as quickly as as a generation could be raised to believe that this is the truth, just as quickly can the next generation be educated with the actual truth. So yeah, as the tide shifts, Taiwan separatism will go back to being the fringe ideology it once was. I mean, Uncle Sam, it cannot afford to pay its political prostitutes for long, and as the money dries up, people will work. People will see where their interests are. I'm confident in that.
For sure. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's true everywhere. People ultimately just want their material conditions to be bettered. They want their daily lives to be better, and they're going to support politically whatever they think can bring that about. So I mean, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, so that's all our main questions. My last one is pretty simple question. You can take this in whatever direction you want, but what position should American communists take on Taiwan? Obviously, our government is going to try and use Taiwan the same way they try to use Ukraine as a way to poke at Russia. They want to use Taiwan as a way to poke at China and try and destabilize China. So, what should we as American communists? What position should we take on Taiwan, and what should we do to educate ourselves about it?
Try not being an edgelord, because like a lot of the memes I told you about that I've seen spreading, a lot of it's just out of the desire for some to be edgelords, and it really helps nobody. And there are people who just reach this conclusion saying, "Oh, all people on Taiwan are bad. Taiwan is like the people on Taiwan are all like the like Cuban gusanos." I mean, and plus like the so-called like gusanos, a lot of them leave Cuba for a variety of reasons, not just for political reasons. You never know, but like they had this idea that Taiwan equals KMT, KMT equals Chiang Kai-shek, and that like people here are all like the political followers of him, even though like Chiang Kai-shek is hated here more than he is on the mainland, by the way. So and recognize that we are here, where we are today for a variety of reasons, for all of those different contradictions. Try to understand some of those contradictions, and if somebody is being like just stupid about this, I mean, you gotta be patient and educate with facts. I mean, you just gotta know the stuff, and if you're unsure of your knowledge, then maybe just try not to argue, because you'll end up making the side for reunification look very bad.
Right.
And I guess just also recognize that Taiwan is a part of China, and that the people on Taiwan at the end of the day are Chinese compatriots, and that if you love if you support China, then you should support the people on Taiwan. I mean, a lot of the people on Taiwan are led by false consciousness, but I mean, look at in America, a lot of the people who I believe will one day form the core of a revolutionary movement will be people who are today led by false consciousness. You can't just write people off and dismiss them and just think of them as like lesser beings or just hopelessly backwards and stupid and uneducated. I mean, we none of us were born knowing this stuff. So but as far as politics, I think American communists should recognize that, I think by and large most do, that Taiwan separatism is not true sovereignty, and that it further embroils Taiwan into serving the US liberal elites. And I guess for the average American listening, I want them to hear that the same people who lied to you about Iraq, the same people who lied to you about all sorts of things, um, you know, are the same people who like covered for Jeffrey Epstein, are the same people who are lying to you about Taiwan. They're the same people who poisoned black communities in America with crack cocaine. And yeah, if you want to support Taiwan, then call on your government to stop interfering with the politics over here and let the people here take care of our own issues. I think what I really don't like is the pro separatist imperialist stooges. Their position, they're stylized as being pro Taiwan, but I don't believe that they are pro Taiwan. They're a pro empire. They're not for the average Joe over here in Taiwan. And I think me being pro reunification and for the dignity of all Chinese people and Taiwan's reunification, I think, and like the guarantee of a better livelihood and an end to all of this nonsense, I think this is the position that is actually pro-Taiwan. Yeah. And I guess I'll call on your government to stop using Taiwan as a chess piece.
Right. I couldn't agree more. It's the same with Ukraine. You know,
Yeah.
you have all these people with Ukraine flags in their bios, and pretending like they're being pro-Ukraine. And what have they cheered on except for the destruction of Ukraine? You know, so the real pro-Taiwan or pro-Ukraine position is to argue against imperialist meddling, because that time and time again has proven to make the situation worse on the ground. So, yeah, thank you so
Exactly.
much. Yeah, thank you so much for your time today. This was super informative for me, to get a beginner's lesson of sort of Taiwan-China relations for dummies, here. So appreciate you for doing that. Before we head out, is there anything you want to plug or shout out?
I have a pretty long series with Carl Zha on his Silk and Steel podcast. It's like a TLDR version of Taiwan's history, but it's also like 12 hours long in total. But if you want, I'll give you the linking and put it in the description.
Yeah.
And I guess you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is right over here. And Xiangyu.tw is my Instagram handle. It's also a URL for my website, which is like kind of a rudimentary website, but it's got all my links and stuff. And I'm working on my upcoming album, so I guess be sure to follow. And if you want to support my work, then when the album comes out, you can buy a physical copy. Yeah.
Awesome. I will definitely be doing that. I'm a big fan of the music. For those who don't know, Xiangyu does rap music. He's a rapper, so I really like it. I'm a big fan of hip hop, so having some politically conscious, anti-imperialist, communist music to listen to is awesome. And I
Actually,
think important.
my latest music video is called for a song called Golden Slum, and the one before that is called I Don't Believe. I guess maybe you could link one of those two videos in the description for people who want to check it out. They have English subtitles, so you just got to turn on the captions. Hold on, people in chat are asking for links.
Yeah, let me find
Let
one.
me send them to you in private chat, then you can post them in the live
Perfect.
chat. How about that?
Perfect. Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah,
I've
once
seen Golden Slum yet. I've seen I Don't Believe. That one was good. The music video is cool too.
the Golden Slum video was slightly delayed. I wish I got to film it when I was like now instead, now that I'm a little bit more fit than I was. But whatever. That's incentive to make more videos in the future.
For sure.
This is Golden Slum, and I don't believe is the one that's more political. I think Golden Slum is talking about like the I guess the nihilistic culture that we're kind of like in like the rat race culture that people certainly feel. And I guess it's one of them is more philosophical and social. The other one is just more directly like in your face politics. I have some other songs that I completed. Just got a few more songs to finish before I release the album. It's just kind of hard working on this when I'm a conscript and like during most of the week is just like I finish and I just want to like hang out or just like chill or rest, you know. But my
Right. That
service ends
makes
soon,
perfect
so I'm gonna
sense.
spend more time on it.
For sure. Yeah. Hopefully you get some more time when you're finished with your service there. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait for the new album. So yeah, anything else you got before we head out?
No, just keep up your good work. Thank you very much for having me on. And I guess we just gotta deal with the fact that the more relevant that our side of the politics become, us some LaRoucheite fascists, the more people are gonna scream. But I think their voices are going to be drowned out by more sensible ones.
Yes. I mean, I already see it happening, and I didn't know if we were going to get into this or not, because I know we've both been hashtag canceled by the online left for being LaRoucheite, Pat Sock fascists, or whatever the fuck they're saying this week. But yeah, I mean, there's their attacks and their hate mobs aren't getting the same kind of traction that they once were. People aren't taking it as serious, and there's a whole bunch of people now who are real, legitimate, committed Marxist-Leninists, at least in the American left, which 5 years ago wasn't the case. So
Yeah.
it's great to see that there's a real movement forming that doesn't give a shit what this fake left has to say.
At the end of the day, I mean, human decency is still very important. I mean, I think a lot of the internet left culture, it's just like corporate HR stuff. It's like, okay, if you don't say these things, I mean, okay, I admit that I can be an asshole when I say certain things, but you don't. The way you treat people, it's not about avoiding using or not using certain words. It's from the heart how you treat people as like your fellow human being, and the way they treat like they act like, okay, if you have a slight disagreement over something, then or like I don't know, they can't just like live and let live. They'll just be like, oh, you betrayed me, I'm gonna take it personally, I'm gonna try to ruin your life, I'm gonna try to dox you, I'm gonna try to like, you know. And it's just ridiculous. And like people that you thought were I made the mistake of like, treating those people as like people who could be won over in time. I think they're firmly on the side of reaction. And I just got like things that you tell them, and like when you were on good terms, they'll just use that against you like publicly and be like, oh yeah, man, he like blah 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 blah. Like this is like I mean, this is an extreme example. This is not my case, but it's like, oh yeah, man, he told me he lives on so and so street and his mom lives here, and I don't like him, so go do something about it. Like that's the extent that they go to, essentially. Or you
Uh,
look at like a certain overly online person. He was very convinced that Haas was Adam Tahir, and we're all Adam Tahirs, and they go harass this like this innocent like Tahir family in Michigan.
I
And it's like,
just learned about that recently. I feel bad for the justice for Adam Tahir, the real Adam Tahir. I mean, it is insane. It's like I can't imagine even treating people that way. But I mean, it was the first time I got canceled by the left. Someone screenshotted DMs I had sent them and posted them publicly on Twitter, and was like, I had never dealt with behavior like that before.
Yeah.
I didn't even think that. Figured you just have that mutual respect of not sharing stuff like that. And yeah, I think my biggest mistake too was giving leftists too much credit and too much kindness sometimes. And it's like, you want to be open-minded and you don't want to write off anyone, and there are people who consider themselves on the left who are winnable, but when it comes to some of these figures who just spend all day on Twitter just shitting and trying to tear down other people who are actually building things, it's like these people are on the side of reaction.
Yeah,
like you said,
we are all Adam Tahir. Guess there's an Adam Tahir in all of us.
I love it. What a story. Well, all right, we'll end it here. Hopefully we'll have you back on again, Xiangyu. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much. We'll play the intro and we'll see you next time, folks. Thanks so much.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.